Matthew, when was Council made aware about the presence of PFAS near Dubbo Airport?
So we're actually doing some testing for another project because we've got a lot of projects happening at the airport at the moment, so it's a very exciting time for developments around the airport. We weren't actually specifically looking for PFAS. We were looking to make sure there wasn't asbestos in the ground. We were just doing some general testing of the ground conditions. And then on the 1st of September, we were notified by our testing organisation that there was actually PFAS in a couple of the areas there in the ground. So what we did then was organised a meeting for the neighbours, the immediate neighbours, the next day. So as soon as we found out about it, we wanted to let those neighbours know immediately. So the next day we organised a meeting, and I was at that meeting. From memory, there were 4 neighbours who were potentially impacted by that. 3 of those neighbours could make that particular meeting at short notice. And really the purpose of that meeting was to do 2 things. Firstly, to inform them that there was potential for PFAS to be on those neighbouring properties because we found some on the actual airport. And the second thing we wanted to do was to ask their permission to go on their properties and actually do some further testing, because we had no confirmation that it was on their properties, only that we knew it was nearby. So we wanted to do that further testing. The 3 neighbours who were there on that day gave us permission to go and do that. So that's the process that we're in at the moment. We've been working with both the EPA and New South Wales Health and our own consultants to do that testing, but that testing takes some time, so we haven't completed that testing yet. We also informed the public on the 2nd of September as well. Once we'd met with the neighbours first to let them know, we also informed the public that we'd found PFAS at the airport, which is presumably why you're following up now, because it was out in the public realm.
Yeah, and so obviously investigations are probably at a very preliminary kind of stage, but do you have any sort of indication of how far the PFAS contamination may have spread from Dubbo Airport? You mentioned that 4 sort of neighbours in that immediate sort of vicinity were contacted. Does that imply that it's it's relatively contained? It's not going to affect some of the sort of outlying suburbs. Is that right?
That's correct. As far as we know, it probably hasn't travelled that far, and it may not even be present in those neighbours' properties because the airport's a fairly large parcel of land. We'll obviously do further testing around the airport to see how far it's gone, but from what we've seen so far, and just keep in mind that this is very much a preliminary stage, what we've seen so far, it may not even be in those neighbour properties, but we want to do that testing to make sure, so then we get a really good idea of the footprint of PFAS there. Hopefully it isn't affecting those neighbours. If it is, then we'll have to take further steps and work out what we do from there. But at this stage, it really is about finding out where it is, just finding out that footprint of PFAS at this stage, and then we'll go further if we need to.
And is there any indication of where the PFAS may have come from? I'm assuming that it's something to do with the operations of the Dubbo Airport. Is that something that's going to be part of the investigations, or are there any kind of preliminary indications of what it may be at this stage?
Certainly the existence of PFAS normally relates to firefighting, and from a firefighting perspective, there has been PFAS used at the airport, both from a training perspective and also for firefighting aircraft. So at some stage there might have been PFAS dumped on the ground, there might have been PFAS used and had some overflow there. Obviously, when this was being used at the time, no one knew the impacts of PFAS, how long PFAS would hang around for. It was used in good faith by firefighting authorities around the world to try and be a good fire retardant, which it was, but it just had that ongoing effect where it just didn't break down. Obviously, it's not used anymore, but at the airport it would have been used at some stage for some sort of firefighting process.
Right, and I'm of the understanding that there was a similar sort of situation several years ago, further in town with a number of sort of bore water holes. Is that correct?
Well, we've got Ollie Robbins Oval, which is along the river and goes to the back of the CBD, and that was an area, it's used for lots of things, that particular oval, but it also was used for firefighting training. They used to have firefighting competitions there, and again, at some stage, PFAS would have been used there. We've done some testing there. We've found where we've got a fairly restricted area, and we've got a fence around that area at the moment, and we're going through the process to work out how to deal with that. And there are a couple of ways to deal with it. I mean, one way, the most drastic way to deal with it, is to dig down deep enough to the point where you get no PFAS detected and take all that soil away and basically take it to a dumping site. That's a fairly drastic way because there's a huge amount of dirt that needs to be moved. Other ways, you can contain it, you can cap it as such, and so we're looking at the best way to deal with that, both for protection of the community and also the most cost-effective way. At the moment, we've just got a fence around that area so that people don't go onto that area and play in that dirt.
All right, brilliant. The other thing I was hoping to ask you about, so I saw that you mentioned, so prior to some of the recent flooding events, Council had something around the order of a $40 million sort of backlog when it came to infrastructure and sort of pothole sort of restoration. I've heard you mention that with the recent flooding events, that number, that estimate is likely to be quite a bit higher. Do you have any sort of vague estimates as to sort of the damages caused by the floods, or how large the infrastructure sort of backlog is at this point in time?
Nothing that I can put my finger on in terms of a number at this stage, but I might just go back a little bit, if I may. Many years ago, Dubbo City Council, before the amalgamation, had a report done by a gentleman by the name of Percy Allen, or Percy Allen Consulting, and so we had what we called the Percy Allen report, and that report gave us some indication of our backlog, our infrastructure backlog overall, in terms of every bit of infrastructure Dubbo had and what we needed to put aside to try and fill that backlog. We started working on that process to the point by 2016 we'd almost gotten that figure down to zero, and that included infrastructure backlog on our buildings as well as our roads. But it was a fairly big effort over a number of years to actually build up the finances to fill that backlog. Along came an amalgamation, the area was much larger, then there was more work to be done on solving some of those issues, and then of course drought followed by lots of water. So that's gotten to the point now where the new amalgamated area has that figure of about $40 million that you've heard me mention before. And that was before these latest rain events. So that was the figure that was just restricted to the roads, not any of our buildings. That was just our road infrastructure. So it gave residents an idea of just how big an impact all of this recent wet weather and also the larger road network that we've got now after the amalgamation. We've got somewhere in the vicinity of 2,700 kilometres of roads in our LGA, which is a huge road network. And again, when you have water like we've had recently, there's damage done across that entire network. So I get people every day, without doubt every day, who will talk to me about their road and how bad their particular road is. But unfortunately, it's all across the entire network. There's not just one spot. We will spend in our budget this year, we are spending approximately $28 million on our road network. That's both in repairs and maintenance and major upgrades that we're doing. So it's not as if council's not spending any money on the road network. We're spending significant funds on that, and we get money from the state and federal government to help with our road network as well. But after this latest rain event, that $40 million, that was before the rain events, it will be larger, and we will do some work over this financial year. So by the end of this financial year we're in, so by 30 June next year, we'll have an updated, accurate number in terms of just that infrastructure backlog, because we need that number to be able to go to state and federal governments and say, please give us help, because it's unreasonable to expect the ratepayers of Dubbo Regional Council to pay for that. And to give you an example of another council, Armidale has taken a slightly different approach where they are saying we're going to put the burden on our ratepayers because we're not going to keep waiting around for state and federal government money. They're actually applying to IPART for a 50% rate increase over the next 3 years, which is a huge slug onto the ratepayers, and that's the solution they're going forward with. I'm not saying that Dubbo is going that way with their solution or our solution, but certainly that's the solution that another council is taking.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, in addition to, I guess, the impact on sort of the budget, I imagine it would have had quite a significant impact on the timeline. Previously, prior to the floods, did you have sort of any sort of like rough idea of, how long it was going to take to sort of address this this budget shortfall? Did you have any sort of, I guess, aspirations as to when council expected to, get on top of some of these infrastructure projects?
Not specifically, no. And keep in mind that this council, I only came back onto this council at the end of December last year, and already there was a bit of a backlog there, and there'd already been some wet weather that had started impacting the roads. Certainly it's accelerated this year without a doubt, and it was only recently that we actually put that number together to give us a definite figure in terms of what that infrastructure backlog was. Now again, that was before those recent rain events, so that's a body of work that we'll keep working on, because we do need that accurate figure to be able to go and say to state and federal we need a certain amount of money. It's no good putting your hand out saying we need extra money, but we don't know how much it is. We need to be able to have a figure that we're asking for. And it is across the state. we're going to, this weekend, there's the Local Government New South Wales conference on. We've got 4 councillors going across to that. One of the things that happens at the Local Government New South Wales conference is that there are a number of motions brought forward to be debated. There's 144 motions to be debated this year, and I've looked through those motions, and my estimation would be probably 30 of those motions relate to roads, road funding, extra funding for local government, all around the fact that we just don't have enough money to do what we need to do in our communities. So there's certainly a focus across the entire state, not just a problem faced by WA Regional Council.
Yeah, sure. And were there any sort of specific maintenance projects that were scheduled to happen but have been sort of put on the back burner, as it were, because of these recent floods and some other sort of priorities that council needs to attend to?
Probably more on the contrary to that. Not so much projects being put on the back burner. Many projects are being done, but we just can't get through all the projects that need to be done because there is so much extra work being done at the moment. So we're still continuing with any of those major projects, but unfortunately we just seem to have so many other things pop up, and literally potholes. You'll fill a pothole today because the ground underneath is so wet. It's not unusual to need to go back in a week's time, in 2 weeks' time, to go and fill those potholes again, because what we've got is just so hard to work with, because so much of that water is getting through into the ground underneath bitumen, for example, and the ground is just so saturated. So they are not ideal conditions. We've got some projects that are being delayed because of the rain. We've got some projects down around Burrendong Way, some bridge work that's being done there. It's hard to finish that off. We've got the money for it, we've got the materials for it, but we just can't physically get on there and finish off that project because the ground is so wet. It makes it dangerous for our staff to even get on there. So there are some delays with projects such as that, but really there is just so much work being done on all the road network at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for that, Matthew. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
My pleasure, Kenji. Thank you for your time.